Welcome to Chicago Newsroom. I'm not Ken Davis, but I am honored to be at the steering wheel today. My name is Kitty Kurth, and I'm a PR strategist, organizer, hellraiser, and lifelong Chicagoan with eyes on the rest of the world. I've watched and listened to Ken for decades, and I'm truly humbled that he asked for me to sit in for him today. We'll do our best to keep things interesting. We're going to focus on guns and all things political, everything you shouldn't talk about at the dining room table. Rather than just lamenting gun violence, we're going to explore some innovative solutions. Joining us for today's show are Kathleen Sances from GPAC, Gun Violence Prevention PAC, who's promoting SB 1657 to save lives in Illinois, and Oscar, Grammy, and Golden Globe winning songwriter and artivist Rhymefest Smith, the creative director of Donda's House, who's been working for years to prevent violence. All that and more on today's Chicago Newsroom. Let's go, Chicago.
From Chicago's CAN TV, this is Chicago Newsroom.
Unfortunately, we're talking about one of those things that I keep hoping we're not going to have to talk about again. The first time I was impacted by gun violence, one of my best friends in high school killed himself with a shotgun. And while I am not against banning shotguns, because I have also eaten some very tasty moose shot by hunting rifles, I think that the amount of guns on the streets today, it's hurting us every day here in Chicago, but we see things like Las Vegas, Charleston, Newtown, Representative Stephen Scalise. You know, we keep hearing about this again and again, and people keep asking, oh, maybe this is what it's going to take to have some sensible gun violence prevention measures. Kathleen, you work in this space all the time. Do you think anything is going to make a difference? What do you think we can do?
When is enough ever going to be enough? I think that boils down to a matter of integrity with lawmakers, that they'll have to come to that soul-searching decision just like in other civil rights movements, because we see 20 children mowed down in how many seconds, and still we haven't seen action.
I know you're working on SB 1657, Senate Bill 1657, and why are you having some success with this? Why do you think this could be different? What's going on with it?
Well, we were able to pass Senate Bill 1657, which is the Gun Dealer Licensing Act, out of the Senate in April, and we would like to move it through the House in November veto session in Springfield. So here we are in Illinois. We're bordered by 6 states. Our borders are loose because of the federal government, and Congress has not acted to close them. So what can we do? Well, we know that the top 10 source dealers of guns that are traced to Chicago crimes come from 10 dealers.
Wow.
And 7 of them are in Illinois, and 6 of those are in Cook County. So like, they're in our backyard, and they're just letting these guns out the door. We can't trace them. So if we can just ask them to put in some very simple safety precautions, we know that we could stop the flow of guns. Our streets are flooded with guns.
Mm-hmm. So what would SB 1657, what would it do?
It would require background checks for employees. It would require training for those employees so they could spot a straw purchase, which is an illegal transfer of the gun after the initial sale at the dealer, and some basic security precautions, videotaping outside the store to prevent theft, because theft is another issue of how guns end up on our streets.
So that doesn't really sound like you're taking people's guns away. That just sounds like you're making guns a little bit safer.
It has nothing to do with gun ownership.
Okay. So everybody calm down. Nobody's taking your guns.
No.
Jay, you are, I call you an artivist because you're an artist and an activist. And by the way, he's won an Oscar, a Golden Globe, a Grammy, and now, did I hear you're also nominated for an Emmy?
Yes, I'm nominated for an Emmy for a show that we produced last year for Black History Month.
And no Tony yet? What are you doing, slacking?
Well, I'm actually working with a friend of mine, Dave Bryan, who's a member of Bon Jovi, and he wrote a musical called Memphis. And we're working together on some other music right now, so we'll see.
Okay, so in the future, it might be the ego, and then it might
Right
be
now it's the ego, but we're looking for an EGOT. And we're looking at how to connect this type of mainstream success to what we're talking about, local communities, local young people, how to get young people involved in positive, productive activities so that they don't turn to violence and destructive activities. You know, as far as SB 1657, I think that it is sensible. It makes sense. The problem I think that we have not only in our state, but in our country, is that the industries get to write the legislation. So even when we look at what's in the news now, bump stocks, you know, the NRA came out first and said, okay, we'll deal with bump stocks. Then you look at the president saying, yeah, that's what we're going to deal with, and the Congress saying, yeah, this is sensible. The NRA should not be able to write gun legislation because it sells guns. I think that
You don't think that's right?
Well, I think that's the problem with our political system, is that the industries that are selling us products get to write legislation and in fact buy politicians to enforce legislations that may not be good for communities. So I believe that communities have to be more civically engaged to understand that what we think about things doesn't necessarily come from our own experience.
So
sometimes it comes from what is sold to us legislatively and through products.
So you're saying that, for example, the fact that in our healthcare legislation, the fact that we don't have the right to negotiate drug prices, you think that might have been put in there by the drug companies?
The pharmaceutical companies and the insurance companies. I mean, for the fact that they can write the legislation and people that come from, okay, I retire as a congressman, but now I go work for a pharmaceutical company and I'm helping them to write the legislation to introduce to Congress, or the gun lobby. I mean, there's some very powerful people that no one knows their names who are writing the legislation for the way that we live our lives. And people die, and you know, we were just talking, people die and community organizations go to our legislators and we say, if we can save one life, and they say that's not enough. well, if lives are not enough, then what is? And so we have to get to what is enough to get our legislators to make sensible policy.
So one of the ways that
like SB
1657. But one of the ways that that marriage equality passed was, you know, society kind of got to a certain point where, to quote my husband, Kevin Lampy, everybody either had a friend or family member who was gay or a favorite TV character who was gay. And suddenly, after years of working on it, it wasn't scary anymore. Do you think that there's a way that we can influence the legislators to know that they are affected by gun violence and to make them feel it a little bit more so they could feel like it was an issue to them?
You know, I say this all the time. It's not if you're going to be impacted by gun violence, it's when. And I think that we see that. Cynthia, the teacher who was shot in Rogers Park, going to catch a train to go to dinner. You know, I think, again, you know, this is happening all over the state. And, you know, the lawmakers are being bullied by the gun lobby in Illinois, and they're being threatened, and they're afraid they're going to lose their jobs. And I think it's time that they realize they need to put their constituents first and not their jobs.
Well, you know, but I also think that we're in a pivotal time in America where people, including lawmakers, including football players, including entertainers, artists, people have to be willing to lose their jobs. You know what I mean? I think we always come up to this thing where we say, well, people can lose their jobs, so that's why they act like this. And I don't think that this point in America that's a good excuse or reason anymore, because we're at a point where there are whispers about things like civil war. There are whispers about things, and not even whispers. We're facing something where communities are being pitted against other communities, and communities are also being pitted against themselves. So I don't think that it's enough anymore for someone to protect their job. I think we have to start standing for what we believe in, or there will be nothing.
And really, let's face it, is state rep really that great a job? You have to run for office every 2 years. You have to go to Springfield all the time. You have to listen to Mike Madigan if you're a Democrat, and you have to complain about Mike Madigan if you're a Republican.
Or you have to work for no money. Because a lot of our state reps haven't gotten, and people don't talk about this, haven't gotten paid in months. So what if if you're a state rep and you want to represent your constituency, but you don't even have enough gas money to get back and forth from Springfield. You know what I mean? Or you're supporting your family, and here you have someone with lobbying interests saying, let's hold their paychecks and basically hold them for hostage until they do what we say. Well, at that point, I believe you're not getting paid anyway. You might as well do what's right.
You know what? You actually, Che, you bring up a really good point. I think that's something that hasn't been talked about enough in the mainstream media, is the fact that legislatures, that with the budget problems, even legislators aren't getting paid, and they're not getting reimbursed. They're not getting their gas money. That's actually a really good point. But
I mean, they're human too. They have families, they have obligations like we all do.
Well,
and because they're legislators, a lot of times we demonize them, but heck, you voted for them. So we might as well support them if they support the issues and agendas of safe communities.
And they are human too, and that's I guess what I was getting at with my question. You know, is there a way that legislators can be made to understand, okay, even if there's not a shooting in your community today, here's how much every shooting costs us through the healthcare system, through the criminal justice system, and here's how much we're spending on that gunshot victim that's taking away from money that could be spent on schools.
And we have put a number on that. And we did try to talk about it in that way, and it still didn't move people. And you would think with the mess that this budget is, and the deficit and the unpaid bills, that somebody would just take that, to task and say, we can save, it's millions of dollars every year. I think, is it like the first day that a gunshot victim is in, it might be the first 3 days, it's $60,000 to the taxpayer.
Yeah, it's probably the first day. It's probably the first day. It's crazy. Che, you've, in your role as artist and Grammy, Oscar, Golden Globe winning songwriter, you've traveled around the world a lot, I know. And you've talked to different world leaders and just regular people about violence and about the effect of violence on society and on individuals in society. Is there anything that you've seen that works other places that we could try in Illinois?
Well, yeah, I mean, there are a lot of best practices in a lot of different places. I mean, you hear about it on the news all the time. Australia had mass shootings. They got rid of, and we have to just talk in plain language. There's no reason to have an AR-15 or a AK-47 other than going to war or killing a bunch of people. You don't hunt with that, And so I think that we have to lower the volume of the intensity of guns that we have. And I think that then you can start putting into perspective what a shotgun is for, what a handgun is for, But the argument that we have in America is so wide-ranging that it's so much noise, people can't focus on the real problem. And we're not willing to, again, and I'm going to go back, because we allow gun makers and the NRA to write gun legislation. And what the NRA really wants is an America where everyone has a gun, and a gun is as normal as this cup. So they have legislation right now where they want you to be able to bring your gun in church. They want you to be able to bring your gun into a restaurant. And so the argument is so big and noisy, unless we can compartmentalize like all of that, it's hard to focus on little changes. I mean, we were talking outside about, I have to get a license for my car. I have to get registration for my car. I have to take my car to get an emissions test.
And people can,
but I can just buy a gun.
People can check in a minute and see whether I have a driver's license.
Right.
The police can check in a minute to see if I have a driver's license. Why can't the police check in a minute to see if I have a FOID card and if I have gun registration? I mean, it's just insane
There's
to me
science that can
that
track
there's
bullets. You know what I mean? Where
Right.
you can, the hammer on a gun can put an imprint on a
Yep.
bullet, where we can know by looking
Right.
at that shell where
Right.
but that legislation, they can't get through.
Well, the federal government, the licensing agent, is prevented from keeping electronic records. So,
what is that a law we have to change at the federal level?
well, best
Or-
case, this would all be done at the federal level, but our current president was bought and sold by the NRA with $33 million. So I don't expect that to happen anytime soon. So that's why it's important.
Let's
like we
talk
work
about
here.
that for a second. I love facts and figures. The $33 million was given to President Trump's campaign, or
Right.
given to the Republican National Committee, or
It went to his campaign. So whatever door it went into.
Well, you know, but I also think that as we talk about legislation and what's happening, and you and I were talking, there are also historical racial implications. So, you know, one of the things in my community that is an argument is that historically guns have been people have tried to keep guns out of inner cities because they've been wanting to keep guns out of black hands.
Right.
And so, and I mean, look, when
that's-
Reagan saw the
that's
Black
been-
Panthers walk
yeah,
into the, you know.
that's been
like,
a meme since slave times. The worst
Exactly.
thing that could happen,
is black
according
people
to the
have
white
guns.
owners,
so I think that even as we are working for sensible gun legislation, that has to be addressed for people who are afraid that the government is trying to take their guns because of their race or because of where they
Right.
live or their zip code, because they don't see similar types of efforts in suburban communities or in Indiana or in, you know what I
rural
mean? And they say,
communities,
well, it's
yeah.
about me as a person, or you know what I mean? And the country begins to get divided even more. So this has to also be addressed. You know what I mean? That fear is a real fear.
So I have a young friend who has moved to the United States from Kuwait and lived through the Gulf War, and he and his family lived through the Gulf War, and his mother makes him call her twice a day because she is afraid of him getting shot here in Chicago, but she wasn't afraid of his safety during the war. That should say something to people. Do you think there's anything, you work a lot with young people, Che. Can you talk about, is there anything to get kids to stop shooting each other? Is there anything we can do?
Yes. Invest in communities. Like, you know what I mean? So what I find is when young people have outlets for their art, they're not thinking about a gun.
Or
when
a
they
job.
have outlets for a career, you know, learning new technology in terms of STEM. You know what I mean? I think that when communities are invested in, the light is shining and the darkness goes away. And so what I've been noticing in Chicago is wherever you see the most gun violence, you also see the lack of investment in education.
Shocking. Kathleen, didn't you have some success in Lyons or in one of the suburbs with getting rid of gun shops? Or
Well, we worked with a group of plaintiffs from Chicago who were impacted by gun violence to file a suit against the cities where 3 of the bad actors, these gun dealers, do business. And we settled with the city of Lyons. And their ordinance that the village adopted that every gun dealer has to follow is similar to what we're trying to enact in Senate Bill 1657. And so now these stores are getting inspected. And after the first 2 inspections, this gun dealer reported to the police that they stopped 51 straw purchases. So that's 51 guns on the street can translate to 51 lives saved. So this works.
What will it take to get that to happen in other communities? Are you going to have to go back to court again, or would SB 1657, would that fix this?
Yeah, we need Springfield to take care of this. A patchwork of laws, just makes
Municipal
it difficult,
laws, yeah.
right? And you don't know if you're driving from one, municipality to the next. So if I can't buy the gun here, I'm just going to go over here because this city is easier to buy a gun at. So Springfield needs to do it. And everybody thinks that Chicago has the toughest gun laws. But I want to point out there are no gun dealers in the city of Chicago. So people are going out to the suburbs. And like I said,
So you mean when President Trump keeps saying that Chicago is the problem, Chicago is the problem?
it's not the problem. I mean, Illinois has a problem, and it's in the suburbs.
But I'd also like to add to that Chicago in particular has a problem with corruption that needs to be addressed. One of the city's papers did an investigation and found out many guns from the gun buyback program back
up
on the street. So whose doorstep does that lay on? The mayor's? I mean, who the police? Well, who is in charge of the police? That's who I want to go
and
to.
Maybe,
Eddie
maybe
Johnson,
do we need some civilian?
The union?
Maybe do we need some civilian oversight of the gun buyback program? Maybe do we need? Your group is part of a statewide coalition of gun violence prevention organizations. Yes.
Yes, we have 110 members right now, and we add more every day.
110 organizational members.
Correct.
So maybe we need to agitate to get those folks at the table and overseeing the gun buyback programs. Because honestly, Che, I had either not known about that or kind of forgotten about that.
When trains are robbed, of crates of guns in the middle of black neighborhoods, how did they know that the train with the crate of guns
was
would be there
there
at that time? See, there's something going on in Chicago that, in addition to what you're saying in terms of legislation, there's something very corrupt at the root of gun violence in Chicago, and where guns are obtained from, and how guns find their ways from the institutions that are supposed to protect communities back to the communities that destroy them. So when we take in the disinvestment, when we take in trains being robbed of crates of guns in the city, we take in guns from buyback programs ending up on the street, my question is, what's really going on in Chicago?
And who's benefiting? Who's benefiting?
Because we know who's losing.
Right. We know who's losing. But getting back to that, like the train thing, that's kind of a simple solution. I mean, there should be CCTVs in those train yards anyway.
But they already know that.
Yeah.
I mean, that's already known. So then we come back to the question, who's benefiting? And that's who, we know how the NRA benefits. We know how the gun lobbies benefit. But who else is benefiting from crime on our streets?
The gun manufacturers, because all those stolen guns means that they get to sell some more.
And they get to sell ammunition, and they get to make more money. So how do we take the profit incentive out of guns?
But see, I don't necessarily agree that only the gun manufacturer is benefiting. I think it's bigger than that. I honestly believe that as neighborhoods are changed around, as gentrification is happening, as there are different things dynamics happening in our city, and different ways to make people shift and things move, the devaluing of property so that other people come in and buy it up for cheap. I think that violence is a part of that. And I've seen this around the country. This is not something that's particular to Chicago. Right. We've seen it in Brooklyn, we've seen it in Harlem, we've seen it in Philadelphia, Baltimore.
I see a
and it's a
screenplay
pattern.
here, Che. I spend a lot of days reading the newspaper and being a little pessimistic about what's going on. Is there anything that you've seen, any programs that you've seen that are working?
Yes. I
you
believe.
Go first, and then Kathleen.
I'm just so passionate about it. I'm sorry, I don't mean to take time. Community benefit agreements with developers. So as we see, the Obama Library is going to enter the south side of Chicago with a $2.1 billion impact to the south side of Chicago. There needs to be an agreement where what we talked about, investment in communities that also can help organizations like yours dispel the guns and create good legislation.
What kind of investment in community?
Well, I think what we're looking for is who from the community will be on the board of the Obama Library that can say this is what this community needs so people don't get displaced. Businesses that are already in existence, how much funding is going to go toward helping those businesses become better instead of just replacing them with big chain stores? If there's going to be, they're talking about with the Obama Library, a new hotel, 13-story hotel going up. How many people from the community are not just going to have jobs, but have head positions where they're making $80,000 or more? You know, I believe that when communities start growing like that, you start seeing less gun violence. And then it empowers organizations like yours to be able to go to Springfield and lobby for what that community needs, because now the people who are affected by gun violence are usually people who are poor. So that's why you don't see as big of a push as you see with the NRA. Once people start getting the economics in their community and the investment they need from institutions that are developing in those communities, they'll start having the resources to fight gun violence.
Kathleen, is there something that people watching Chicago Newsroom can do if they think that gun violence is an issue here in Illinois?
Well, they can help us pass this bill, and what they can do is call their state rep and send them an email and do it every week. Come down to Springfield. We're going to be there next week during veto session, and the following week, November, 2 weeks, 7, 8, and 9. Come down with us, show your face, and let's let all these lawmakers know that we want this bill to pass.
Is there a way is that the best way that people can stand up against all this money? I mean, realistically, it's a money problem, right? Or is it a backbone problem with the legislators?
Well, I mean, the problem is they're elected, and they're elected to serve. And we've polled all up and down the state, and we see an 87% support from Democrats, Republicans, independents, and gun owners for these safety precautions. They need to represent the people who voted them in. And if they don't, there should be a consequence in 2018.
So you just called them safety precautions. Is that probably a better way that will make gun owners less scared about them if you simply point out again and again that there's safety precautions?
They're very simple measures. Background checks, video camera to prevent theft.
I think the NRA is the only person that's against the only entity that's against background checks, because I know I've seen national statistics also that say that overwhelmingly people are for background checks. Che, I have this notion that we should forget conceal and carry and just have open carry, so that you know when somebody's carrying a gun, because if you're carrying a gun or you're carrying a gun, I want to know. I don't want it concealed. So maybe those of us who want less gun violence should try to pass an open carry law. What do you think?
I agree with that. I believe that. I totally agree with that. You know, if you are concealing a gun, the next question is why. You know, and if everybody's open carry, then it's easier to identify nefarious acts by finding the one who's concealing.
You know, Che, you pointed out that Chicago has a corruption problem, and Kathleen, you pointed out that the NRA is paying a lot of lawmakers' salaries. I think we've pointed out some other things that aren't quite that obvious today, too.
There are solutions, and we pointed out solutions. I do believe that SB 1657 is a part of the solution. I believe that community benefit agreements and investment in communities are a part of the solution. And if we can do that, we can push it forward.
Thank you very much, Rhymefest Smith and Kathleen Sances, for being with me here today.
Thank you, Kitty.
We love you, Kitty.
Thank you. I'm Kitty Kurth. Thanks for watching Chicago Newsroom. Remember, you can watch more shows by going to our website, and you can listen to the show by going to SoundCloud. Thanks again. Thanks, Ken Davis.